everyone. My name is Monica Sanchez, and I am the EEC chairman. I have Ken and Joe, and they're going to be doing a presentation on accommodations and the 504.
Well, thank you. I don't know if my sound is on. Can everyone hear me? All right, good. So my name's Ken Nelson. I'm the Director of Student Services, and I apologize, but I am on an elementary school campus right now, so I must wear a mask in order for us to stay safe and open. So again, my name's Ken Nelson, Director of Student Services. One of my many responsibilities is to work and oversee 504s in our district. And I am thrilled to be able to be here today to meet with you all to discuss what is 504 and kind of go over the basics of 504s and what accommodations are and how the process works in San Ramon Valley. And I'm super fortunate, and you guys are very lucky to have Joe and Nora join us. Joe is a support counselor up at Doherty Valley High School and comes with the background in educational leadership as well. He's been a principal in this district at several sites, and he has done great work supporting me and all of our 504 community, doing work in our 504 committee, which is to support each of our sites 504 coordinators, as we really are trying to make sure that our 504 program is consistent throughout our district. And so at this point, if we can go ahead and share that presentation on screen, and Joe and I will tag team this. Joe, I just want to introduce you real quick. So this is Joe and Nora, great friend of mine and colleague.
Hi, everyone. So we'll get started. Like Ken said, I have really enjoyed, Ken and I have known each other for a long time in a variety of roles, both from our kids all the way through all kinds of stuff here in the district. So this is a very interesting, 504s are always interesting to try and navigate, because just like special education, there are lots of subtle nuances. So we'll give you some of the overview, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so we have, I mean, we can, this one or the other one doesn't matter to me. We had a much softer version, a blue version, but this one is a-okay. We'll be able to get through. So I'm not sure who's got the slides, but I'll just tell you to advance if that's okay. That way we can move through that. So you've already met Ken, you've met me. We're just going to go through some of the kind of a 30,000 foot level of the 504 process. Okay. And please, this is like a data dump. So don't be afraid to stop me, stop Ken, and ask a question on the spot, right? Because a lot of this stuff, if you just let it go, it'll just be gone. So let's go, if we just advance, let's go through some of the vocabulary. So first part, and you guys pretty much all know this, right? General ed, right? That's basically what we serve is in our district, right? The general ed population. But then within that, there are two different circles. One is Section 504, right? That's a bit more restrictive. That has certain laws afforded to people who have a Section 504. The other one is IDEA, right? And that is really reserved for our special ed kids, for those who need more restrictions and more help. And so I kind of like to look at it as concentric circles. So that's sort of, we sit in the middle between IDEA and the general population. All right, next one. So just quickly, you guys can read this, right? Section 504 started in 93. It was Americans with Disabilities Act. And then they transferred that over to school, right? And so it's a civil rights that it prevents us from discriminating against people with a disability. And because many of our students have disabilities, we don't want to discriminate against them, right? Next slide. I'm going to go through some of this quickly so that you guys can ask questions, because a lot of this is just stuff that we've already known. This is just the actual wording of the law. Some people really enjoy, I'm not a big fan of reading all of the law, but that's what it is. So you can advance to the next one. And yes, we will have a Q&A session, most definitely. So with just some of the definitions, just so that we understand, and we're going to go to key terms in just a minute. 504s provide accommodations. Okay, now an accommodation is different than a modification. And a lot of us that work in the special ed community understand a modification, right? We are actually modifying or changing the curriculum and what's expected for the student who needs that modification. However, a 504, the difference is we do not do modifications. We do what's called accommodations. That means we try and provide something that will help the student access the curriculum at an equal level. Because remember, we're trying to get the student who has the disability to be able to access the curriculum like every other general ed student. So we're not changing the curriculum, we're helping them, we're boosting them up to provide that level playing field. And so those are the differences there.
And Joe, can I chime in real quick just
Yes.
to give an example of, for example, in high school, particularly students that are on 504s that take classes such as AP classes, AP US History, AP Calculus, it's really important to understand that we cannot make modifications to that program because it fundamentally alters the course.
Right.
And when taking an AP exam, our AP course, it's our obligation, as Joe said, to level the playing field so that a child can access the curriculum and still meet the requirements and the rigor required by an AP course. So we can make accommodations that are appropriate for that particular course, but we are not allowed to fundamentally alter the class itself. For example, you can't say limit homework to 15 minutes a night would be an example where for AP that would fundamentally alter the course itself and therefore doesn't necessarily alter or level the playing field. It would change the field itself, and we cannot do that.
Right. And so the piece to remember is with 504s, the student with the disability, we're trying to bring them up to the level of the average student. And so a lot of times we struggle with how do we help a student who's taking honors and advanced courses because they're not in the general curriculum, they're in an advanced curriculum. And so we really have to balance that, like Ken said. And so it becomes a very difficult task to try and find accommodations that aren't going to change the fundamental premise of the coursework. Okay, next slide. So here are some of the definitions. And again, you would know most of these already, right? Our general education, FAPE, which is what we go under, free and appropriate public education. IDEA, you see there, and we're always, you guys know this, we're always trying to put the student in the least restrictive environment. We always want our students to be served by general education. However, some students have disabilities, and so we want them in the least restrictive environment. So if we can move a student from, for example, special ed into a 504 to help them to be in a least restrictive environment, we will do that. The last one, child find, right? We have an obligation, both as a school, as parents, students, to try and ensure that all students are meeting that, right, have that level playing field. Okay. So a piece of FAPE, and I just want to make sure while we're talking about FAPE, I want people to understand something. K-12, right, public education, we subscribe to FAPE. When a student moves beyond our walls, right, when they graduate from our district and they go to college, colleges don't often have to follow, right? They are not under the same laws we are. Certainly there is IDEA, but FAPE, free and appropriate public education, is oftentimes not adhered to because they don't have to, colleges don't have to subscribe to those same laws. And so a lot of times when you go to college, they will help you with some type of an accommodation. However, they oftentimes don't call it that. They don't call it a 504. They may call it a service program. They may call it a variety of different things. but typically they don't call it a 504. So that's just an awareness. If you have students who are working with students who are going to move on to the next level, it's oftentimes not called a 504, although they will take the 504, look at it, evaluate it, and then provide services that may be appropriate for that student. Okay, next slide. Eligibility. So this is the best part, right? Because this is where we have lots of dialogue with lots of different people. So the eligibility is that the student must have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a life activity. So a lot of times what you see, and I'll do the easiest first, right? A lot of we have a fair amount of kids in our district that have diabetes, for example, and that impacts substantially a major life activity, right? So a lot of our kids who have diabetes are also on a 50, besides a healthcare plan, are on a 504 plan because of the limit that it presents. And so we build accommodations around ensuring that the student, for example, if they're taking a test or they're doing homework and their blood sugar may spike or drop, we make sure that we accommodate that. The documentation could be anything from witnessing that piece to having a doctor's note. So when we talk about substantially limits, that's always a challenge, because what one person feels is substantially limits is very different than what another person feels. And so we have to look at that. Both state and federal guidelines say C average, right? The average student, what is the average student? If they are below the average, then that substantially limits or impacts their ability to learn. So those are the pieces that we look at. Advance over to the next. There we go. So here are right, when we form a committee. So let's say, for example, and I'll just use Ken as an example. Let's say Ken is a student and I'm his parent. I may say, hey, Ken is really struggling with these issues. I think he may have ADHD, and this is what I'm noticing. We would get together then, as I would notify the school, we would get together as maybe his counselor, the parent, the student, an administrator, and a general ed teacher, and we would talk about what's going on with Ken. How are things working? How can we help? Would there be accommodations that would be more helpful to help him with his disability? So we ask two questions. One, does a student have a disability? And typically the answer to that question is yes. The second one is the one that requires more conversation and a more in-depth work. Does it substantially limit an activity? And so we would need to determine, is Ken's disability, is it substantially impacting his ability to access the curriculum like everybody else, right? Does he need some help to level the playing field or not? And if we determine yes, then we will write a 504. If we, and when I say we, it's parent, student, administrator, counselor, gen ed. If we determine no, then we wouldn't write the 504.
So up until this point, Joe's referring to is the eligibility, whether or not a student qualifies or is eligible to receive a 504.
Yeah.
And at this point, we're going to move on and we're going to make the assumption that, let's say a student does, we've determined that the student does have a disability and it does substantially limit one or more major life activities. Then we look at the next section, which I think we're going to move on over to, and look at what do we do about it and how do we level the playing field through making accommodations.
Right. So, and I know the flow chart's hard to see, and if you have this electronically, you can sort of blow it up. But really, basically what happens is a referral comes in from multiple places. It could be a teacher. We have lots of teachers who refer to us and say, look, this student is struggling and I'm not exactly sure. So we check that out. Student, parent, teachers can all recommend. And then we examine what's happening. So usually we do what's called an SST, student study team. and we look with everybody gathered. We look and see what's the issue, what's happening, how can I do things differently? And then we decide, should we do an SST, give the kids some accommodations to try and see, is this working? Do we do a 504 or do we refer for special ed? So there's a few different processes that we go through. And basically, just as Ken said, if we decide, yes, the student needs the 504, then we write that. If we decide the student, no, maybe needs more work, a more restrictive environment, then we refer to special ed. If we decide, no, they can still manage inside the general ed population, then we go back to the SST process. So this is really our structure district-wide in terms of how the referral process works. You can move on to the next one. Hang on. Sorry, I have a child of my own at school, and so I can hear his sound in the background. Okay, so process, just like Ken was talking about, right? It can't reduce or modify the underlying course content. It must be developed by the committee, right? It can't be, you know, like I can't decide, hey, I'm going to give this kid this accommodation, or a parent can't say, hey, can you add this in, right? This has to be done by committee so that everybody is talking about what needs to happen. And I just listed a few accommodations that are fairly standard, at least at the high school level and really almost all levels, right? Preferential seating, extended time on assignments, extended time on assessments, and then a lot of times a copy of the class notes or lecture notes for the students that they can follow along.
And Joe, I want to add to that. We start looking at accommodations, particularly as students start moving into middle and then high school, is that we look at those accommodations to be specific to the coursework that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if a student needs the time and their disability really is around numbers or mathematical concepts, then those accommodations would be applied to that specific subject matter. Obviously, if the disability is, you know, a universal disability, we would apply it to all that were appropriate, but we want to be as specific on the 504 as possible so that it's not a universal accommodation, but it's specific to what the child needs to level the playing field. And I want to take a second to really emphasize that the purpose of a 504, as Joe had mentioned, is to level the playing field and allow a student to make accommodations. But at the same time, the goal of the 504 is to get that student up and going and back on track. And so if a student in third grade qualifies for a 504, does not mean that they need to be on that 504 for the rest of their K-12 career and on. Obviously, if the disability continues to be something that needs to be accommodated and we provide it, yes. But if we're able to, through accommodations, and the goal is that you do not need to necessarily be on a 504 for the rest of your career. It can, if we can get it to where you overcome and are able to meet and get back on that level playing field, we do not need to have a 504 for the rest of that kid's career.
Yeah, what Ken said is really true. And to add to that, really for us in the school system, the bottom line is self-advocacy skills. That's what we want to teach the student, because if they have a disability, typically that disability does not go away. However, if we can help them learn how to manage it so that they know what they need from their teachers. Hey, I know I'm fidgety. I know I get distracted. So these, I need to take frequent breaks and then come back. Okay, most students, and if you ask any teacher, most students will tell you if the student, and we can teach them how to advocate for themselves, and if they can do that, most teachers will give the accommodation that the student requires. And ultimately, that's what we want, is really, we want high functioning adults in our world. That's one of our goals, to graduate kids from SRV UST that have the skills to maintain and to be successful in the general world. And that's what we want. So teaching them the self-advocacy, like giving them some of these accommodations and then allowing them to take over. and really advocate for themselves is really important. And again, I see this, and you guys, since I work K-12, it's wonderful to see a kid in 3rd or 4th or 5th grade, but then as a sophomore, junior, and senior, when they're in the meeting, running their own 504 meeting, advocating for themselves, saying, hey, I don't need this accommodation anymore. I do need this instead. This would work better. That's what we want, is to get that student proficient in self-advocacy to move on.
Thank you, Joe.
You bet. Next slide. So this is, we have a administrative regulation in our district, right? And basically what it says is to safeguard, right, the 504 procedure, to make sure that we are not discriminating against students. So we monitor on a yearly basis how the 504 is working for the student, for the teachers, right, and for the parents. So this is just our board regulation that talks about an annual review and how we do that.
So Joe, with that, I want to add that there are some critical points in a student's career that we definitely feel requires a little more care. And so when a student moves from 5th grade to 6th grade, so elementary to middle school, recess is over. We hold a transitional meeting so that the family and the people that are involved in the student's 504 can meet with the new school, the 504, and make sure that they're going to feel welcomed and understand what the next steps are. And that happens, so 5th to 6th, and it happens again from 8th to 9th grade. So as you transition from elementary to middle, and then middle to high.
So that, I think there's just one or maybe 2 more slides. If that, no. Okay,
no,
so
yeah,
that's perfect. So look, and I know this was quick, you guys. I know it was a data dump, but mostly it's just sort of a general overview. And the best part now is questions, comments, thoughts. So that's really where we can sort of flesh out some of this.